The frustration is real. You served. You sacrificed. You came home broken, and now the very system designed to support you feels like it's actively fighting against you. We're talking about the VA disability compensation process, specifically the C&P examination, the compensation and pension interview, which often feels less like a medical assessment and more like a psychological interrogation designed to find any reason, any slight inconsistency, to deny your claim. This isn't about the facts of your injury alone. This is about performance, preparation, and understanding the subtle psychological traps laid out by the VA system that are still denying good, honest veterans the benefits they deserve. If you walk into that exam unprepared for the mind games, you are already losing. Today, we are dissecting the 7 insidious psychological tricks the VA employs, often unknowingly by the examiner, but systematically by the process itself, that turn your honesty and military training against you, leading straight to a denial rating. This is critical information. Every word matters. The first psychological barrier, the primary hurdle that trips up thousands of veterans every single year, is the normalization trap. This trap is deeply rooted in military culture itself, the ethos drilled into every service member from day one. Suck it up, drive on. Others have it worse. Pain is weakness leaving the body. When you sit down with the examiner, you are psychologically conditioned to minimize your suffering. You are trained to report duty status, not clinical agony. The examiner asks, "How bad is the pain on a scale of 1 to 10? And because you've endured combat deployments, grueling training, and chronic pain for years, you instinctively rate your debilitating knee pain a 5 or 6. In the military context, a 6 means you are still breathing and capable of movement. In the VA context, a 6 means you are moderately affected and likely still capable of substantial employment. You say, "I manage," or "It's not as bad as it was last month," because that is the default veteran response. This minimization, this normalization of chronic distress is precisely what the VA uses to justify a lower rating or even a denial. The examiner, reading the clinical notes, sees a veteran reporting moderate symptoms who manages well, and the psychological conclusion drawn is that the condition is not severe enough to warrant the claimed compensation level. This trap exploits your inherent resilience. It weaponizes your stoicism. You must shift your mindset from reporting duty status to reporting clinical severity. You need to communicate the worst day, not the average day you grit your teeth through. You need to use clinical language that describes the functional limitations imposed by the condition, not just the subjective pain level you have learned to tolerate. Do not let the examiner interpret your fortitude as evidence of recovery or lesser disability. The veteran who says, "I can walk 3 blocks, but then the pain locks my knee up and I need to sit for an hour," is providing clinical evidence. The veteran who says, "My knee hurts, but I can manage," is providing the VA with an easy denial point. The normalization trap is insidious because it makes you your own worst enemy, using your own admirable strength against your claim for help. We must spend significant time dissecting this normalization because it is the most common reason veterans receive lower ratings than deserved. And often, it's the single biggest factor in the initial denial. Think about the language of limitation. When the examiner asks about daily activities, they are not looking for a list of chores you can complete. They are looking for the activities you cannot complete, or the activities that cause significant secondary pain, requiring recovery time. If you say you cut the grass, the examiner hears fully functional. If you say, "I can cut the grass, but I have to take 3 days of heavy medication and cannot move afterward due to the flare-up," that paints a clinically relevant picture of limitation. The psychological trick here is that the examiner often provides leading questions that encourage normalization. They might ask, "So, you're still getting around okay, right?" A veteran's natural inclination is to affirm this, to present a strong face. You must resist this urge. You must pivot the conversation back to the functional impairment, the very act of minimizing your symptoms, which is a survival mechanism learned in service, becomes the bureaucratic ammunition used to shoot down your claim. This is a profound betrayal of the military ethos, and understanding this trap is the first step toward overcoming it. You are not exaggerating. You are accurately reporting the severity of a condition that your training has taught you to ignore. Moving swiftly to the second major psychological hurdle we encounter. The consistency check, weaponizing memory, gaps. Charandi. The VA system, particularly the C&P examiner, operates on the principle that if your narrative changes, even slightly, over time, your entire claim is suspect. The consistency check is the psychological process where the examiner compares your current statements, made under stress in the interview room, against a massive, often disorganized history. Your service medical records, SMRs, previous VA applications, buddy statements, spouse statements, and even notes from unrelated civilian doctors from years ago. The psychological trick here is that human memory is inherently fallible, especially when discussing trauma or chronic pain experienced years or even decades in the past. The examiner is not looking for perfect recall. They are looking for discrepancies that can be framed as intentional exaggeration or fabrication. For instance, if you claim your PTSD symptoms started immediately after a specific event in 2005, but a record from 2007 mentions a different date or a slightly different symptom profile, the examiner can psychologically leverage that inconsistency to argue that the current severe symptoms lack a clear, consistent etiology linked directly to service. They might subtly introduce questions designed to confuse the ACHO timeline. You mentioned feeling isolated in 2006, but your spouse statement says you started withdrawing in late 2007. Which is it? This is not about finding the truth. It's about establishing doubt. For mental health claims, this trap is particularly dangerous. PTSD, anxiety, and depression symptoms often wax and wane. A veteran might report feeling fine during a brief period of stability, only to experience a severe decline months later. The examiner will seize on the fine period documented in the record and use it to argue that the condition is not chronic or severe enough for the current rating requested. The psychological pressure in the interview setting exacerbates this. Under stress, veterans often struggle to perfectly align their recollection of events spanning decades. The VA knows this. They exploit the natural human tendency to fill in memory gaps or summarize complex experiences. To counter this, preparation is paramount. You must review your entire C file, every piece of evidence the VA has, before the C&P exam. If you know there is a discrepancy, address it head-on, professionally and clinically, explaining that the current symptoms are the residual or worsening progression of the service-connected issue, acknowledging that memory fades, but the pain and limitation are real and documented. Do not let the examiner lead you into a contradiction. If you are unsure of a date, state clearly, "I am unsure of the exact date, but the pain began during X deployment." The consistency check is designed to make you feel like a liar, which in turn causes stress, leading to more inconsistent answers. Break this cycle by anchoring your statements to verifiable facts and functional limitations, rather than relying solely on perfect chronological. Recall. They are using your long-term memory against your current need. This leads us into the third highly effective psychological trick employed in the VA process. The Future Projection Test. This test is designed to determine if you are truly disabled now by focusing intensely on your aspirations, goals, and future activities. The underlying psychological premise is simple. A truly disabled individual, particularly one claiming total and permanent disability, TDIU, should theoretically have severely curtailed future plans or career ambitions related to their claimed limitations. The examiner will ask seemingly innocuous questions like, "What do you hope to do in the next 5 years?" or "Do you have any hobbies or interests you plan to pursue?" They might even ask about educational goals or vocational rehabilitation if you respond with enthusiasm about starting anew. Business, going back to school for a demanding degree, or planning an intense physical trip. The psychological conclusion drawn is that your current limitations cannot be as severe as you claim. Hope and resilience, two qualities highly valued in the military, become liabilities in the C&P exam. The VA is not compensating you for your hope. They are compensating you for your current inability to function. The trap works because veterans, naturally optimistic and driven, often speak of desired futures where they have overcome their disabilities. The examiner logs this hope as evidence of current capability. For example, if you are claiming severe mobility issues and the examiner asks, "If you could do anything, what would it be?" and you answer, "I'd love to hike the Appalachian Trail." That statement, even framed hypothetically, suggests a level of physical aspiration that contradicts the claimed severity. The counter strategy here is crucial. When discussing the future, you must frame your aspirations within the context of your current limitations and the realistic probability of achieving those goals. If you hope to go back to school, you must immediately qualify that by stating, "I would like to return to school, but currently, my anxiety prevents me from attending class more than once a week, and sitting for long periods exacerbates my back pain." You are demonstrating that while you have goals, your disability remains the primary limiting factor. The psychological manipulation of the future projection test is subtle because it taps into the veteran's natural desire to please and present a positive outlook. Resist the urge to paint a rosy picture of the future. Focus the examiner's attention squarely on the present, disabling reality. This is not the time for motivational speaking. It is the time for clinical accuracy regarding your current functional capacity. If you claim an inability to maintain employment, expressing robust, achievable future career plans undermines that claim immediately. This test is a direct assault on your claim's severity, using your own optimism as the weapon. You must be brutally honest about what your disability currently prevents, even if you harbor hope for eventual improvement. The rating is based on the now, not the potential future. We now turn our attention to the fourth, often highly technical, yet deeply psychological trick. The attribution shift, introducing doubt about nexus. The VA only compensates conditions that are service-connected. The nexus, the link between your service and your current disability, is the absolute foundation of your claim. The attribution shift is the psychological tactic where the examiner subtly introduces alternative, non-service-connected causes for your symptoms, thereby breaking the nexus. This is particularly prevalent in claims involving degenerative conditions, orthopedic issues, or certain mental health diagnoses where civilian life stressors are abundant. The examiner might ask questions that focus heavily on your civilian activities, your lifestyle, or even your family history, seeking to create an alternative hypothesis for your current pain. For instance, if you are claiming knee pain from an injury sustained in the service, the examiner might spend an inordinate amount of time asking about your weight gain since separation, your sedentary job, or a casual fall you had while gardening last year. The psychological goal is to plant the seed of doubt. Maybe this isn't service-connected. Maybe it's just aging, obesity, or a normal civilian mishap. The examiner is attempting to shift the attribution of the disability away from the military service and onto personal responsibility or natural progression. This shift is powerful because it leverages the veteran's own sense of guilt or awareness of civilian lifestyle changes. If you admit, "Yes, I gained weight after I got out," The examiner can use that admission to argue that the weight gain is the primary cause of the current knee deterioration, not the service injury. To counter the attribution shift, the veteran must consistently and firmly anchor the current symptoms back to the service event, even when discussing civilian factors. If asked about weight gain, the response should be, "The weight gain is a secondary complication because the service-connected knee injury prevents me from exercising as I did while on active duty." You are acknowledging the civilian factor, but immediately linking it back to the service-connected primary condition. Furthermore, the attribution shift is often employed when discussing mental health. The examiner might focus heavily on post-service events, a divorce, a job loss, financial stress, and attempt to attribute the current depression or anxiety solely to those civilian stressors, ignoring the foundational trauma experienced during service. The veteran must be prepared to articulate the continuous chain of causation. The service trauma led to hypervigilance and isolation, which made maintaining civilian relationships impossible, leading to the divorce, which is merely an exacerbating factor of the underlying service-connected PTSD. The psychological trick here is that the examiner is not required to prove the new cause. They only need to introduce enough doubt about the original cause, the nexus, to justify a denial. Robust, independent medical opinions, IMOs, are often required to overcome a successful attribution shift. Never let the examiner successfully isolate your current condition from its military origin. The fifth psychological trap, often masked as friendly conversation, is the open-ended fishing expedition. This is perhaps the most dangerous trap for the unprepared veteran, especially in mental health C&P exams. The examiner starts with a broad, seemingly harmless question. "Tell me about your time in the service," or "Just walk me through your life since you got out." This is not an invitation to share your life story. It is an open-ended fishing expedition designed to gather extraneous, irrelevant, and potentially harmful information that can be used later to discredit your claim. The psychological mechanism at play is the veteran's desire to be thorough and cooperative. Veterans are trained to provide complete answers. However, in the C&P exam, relevance is everything. If you are claiming PTSD related to a combat deployment and you spend 20 minutes talking about your high school football career, your first marriage, or a minor administrative issue from 10 years ago, you are providing the VA with unnecessary data points. The examiner is hoping you will volunteer a piece of information that is totally unrelated to the claimed disability, but suggests a pre-existing condition, an alternative cause, or an underlying character flaw. For instance, if you mention a minor disciplinary action from 15 years ago that had nothing to do with your current shoulder injury, the examiner might subtly include that detail in the final report to paint a picture of a less than credible individual. The key to navigating the open-ended fishing expedition is extreme focus and brevity. Your answers must be laser-focused on the claimed disability and its functional limitations. If the examiner asks, "How is life generally?" a concise, disability-focused answer is required. Life is challenging due to the limitations imposed by my severe anxiety and chronic back pain. Do not elaborate on your financial woes or your difficult relationship with your adult children unless those issues are direct secondary results of the service-connected condition you are claiming. If the examiner tries to pull you off topic, politely but firmly pivot back. "That's an interesting point, doctor, but regarding my knee condition, the limitation of motion is currently measured at X degrees, which significantly impacts my ability to climb stairs." You must manage the flow of information. The VA wants data. You only give them relevant data points that support the nexus and the severity. The psychological effect of the fishing expedition is that the veteran feels they have been heard and understood because they spoke for a long time, but in reality, they have simply provided the VA with extra material to scrutinize and potentially weaponize against the claim. Silence is often better than irrelevant detail. Be cooperative, but restrict the scope of your cooperation strictly to the claim at hand. The sixth psychological trick is perhaps the most cunning because it exploits fundamental human trust. The rapport. Misdirection, the friendly examiner. Many veterans walk into the C&P exam expecting a hostile, cold interrogation, but they are often met with a friendly, empathetic, sometimes even fellow veteran examiner who smiles, shares anecdotes, and seems genuinely interested in their well-being. This is the rapport misdirection. The examiner is attempting to build trust quickly to lower the veteran's psychological guard. Once the guard is down, the veteran is far more likely to overshare, minimize symptoms, falling into Trap 1, or volunteer irrelevant information, falling into Trap 5. The psychological principle is simple. We are more truthful, or at least less guarded, with people we perceive as allies or friends. If the examiner shares a story about their time in the Army, the veteran naturally feels a bond and might relax, saying something like, "Yeah, I know how it is. Sometimes I just push through the pain because that's what we do." That seemingly innocuous statement, made in a friendly chat, is instantly logged as evidence that the veteran pushes through the pain, contradicting the claimed severity. Remember this critical fact. The C&P examiner, whether they are a veteran or not, is a contractor working for the VA whose sole job is to gather data and provide an opinion on the current severity and nexus of your claimed condition. They are not your therapist, they are not your friend, and their empathy, while potentially genuine, does not override their professional duty to the VA. To counter the rapport misdirection, you must maintain professional detachment throughout the interview. Be polite, respectful, and cooperative, but remain focused and clinical. Avoid engaging in long personal anecdotes, even if the examiner initiates them. If the examiner attempts to bond over shared military experience, acknowledge it briefly, but immediately pivot back to the clinical facts of your disability. For example, "It's great to meet a fellow veteran. Now, regarding my bilateral knee instability, the pain is constant and the buckling occurs 3 to 4 times a day." You must constantly remind yourself that every single word spoken in that room is being documented and assessed. The examiner who asks about your fishing trip might be genuinely interested, but the note they take will be, "Veteran engages in recreational activities, suggesting capability." The rapport misdirection is a psychological tool to extract unguarded information. Do not fall for the charm. Treat the exam as a highly formalized, professional medical interview focused solely on your functional limitations. Finally, the seventh psychological trap, often set before you even enter the room, is the documentation scrutiny, weaponizing your own paperwork. This trap involves the examiner using seemingly benign or outdated documents from your C-file to discredit your current claim. The psychological effect is to make the veteran feel overwhelmed and unable to fight back against their own history. The VA has access to decades of records, performance reviews, administrative separation documents, old treatment notes, and even emails or texts if they were ever entered into the file. The documentation scrutiny is the process of cherry-picking positive data points from the past and amplifying them to contradict the current severity. For example, if you are claiming severe PTSD and difficulty maintaining employment, but a performance review from 2015 described you as highly effective and motivated, the examiner will psychologically leverage that past success against your current struggles. They might ask, "If you were highly effective in 2015, what changed so dramatically that you are now unemployable?" This question ignores the progressive nature of many mental and physical conditions, or the fact that symptoms often worsen under stress or without proper management. They are weaponizing a snapshot of your past, functionality against your current reality. This trap also involves scrutinizing the absence mass of documentation. If you claim a specific symptom started in 2003, but there is no corresponding entry in your SMRs, the examiner will psychologically exploit that gap, implying that if the condition was truly severe, it would have been documented. To combat the documentation scrutiny, the veteran must proactively review their C file and understand the potential weak spots. If there is a positive review from 2015, the veteran must be prepared to explain how they were masking symptoms, how the condition progressed, or how external support, like a highly supportive spouse or employer, allowed them to function temporarily, which is no longer the case. The core psychological defense here is contextualization. You must provide the context that explains why the documentation is misleading or incomplete. For the lack of SMR documentation, you must explain the military culture of avoiding sick call for fear of career repercussions, or the fact that your unit's medical personnel often dismissed non-acute issues. Do not let the VA use your history as a weapon without providing the necessary narrative context. The goal of this scrutiny is to establish that your current claim is either exaggerated or not consistent with your historical behavior, effectively undermining your credibility before the final decision is made. Understanding that every piece of paper in that file is being analyzed for its potential to deny your claim is the psychological preparation necessary to navigate this final trap. We have dissected 7 critical psychological traps: the normalization trap, which exploits your military resilience; the consistency check, which weaponizes memory gaps; the future projection test, which uses your hope against your current limitations; the attribution shift, which introduces alternative causes to break the nexus; the open-ended fishing expedition, which seeks irrelevant, harmful data; the rapport misdirection, which uses false friendliness to lower your guard; and finally, the documentation scrutiny, which weaponizes your own history against you. The VA disability examination is not just a medical appointment. It is a high-stakes psychological assessment where your training, your memory, and your natural inclination to be polite and resilient are systematically used to deny or minimize your compensation. To succeed, you must shift your mindset from that of a military service member reporting for duty to that of a patient accurately reporting clinical limitations. Preparation is the only defense. Review your records, anticipate the traps. Practice articulating your worst-day symptoms and maintain professional detachment throughout the entire process. Your benefits are not a given. They are earned through service, but securing them requires strategic psychological warfare against a system designed to protect its own resources. Go in prepared, stay focused, and refuse to let these insidious tricks deny you the compensation you rightfully deserve. This is the difference between a successful claim and a frustrating long denial. The fight continues, but now you are armed with the knowledge of their tactics.